What do you do? What do you do in the bath?
Hello, lovelies. Not a lot of housekeeping today. Behind the scenes, still working on the crowdfunder for Machinations of the Space Princess. So that will be an adventure campaign and almost a sort of reissue of the core book, even though it's never gone away. But an opportunity to grab some material for that. So yeah, things are continuing, albeit slowly. And that'll also be testing a model for any future crowdfunders that I decide to do, and it will be the first one on Kickstarter, most likely. We've just about 99% settled on Kickstarter. I've had my issues with Kickstarter in the back. Their censorship of other creators has concerned me, and the way in which they constrict projects has concerned me. But there does seem to be a little bit of a shift in the zeitgeist, and they have approved projects which in the past they never would have. Now, it's not that Machinations is particularly overtly sexual or anything else. It's sleazy. It's like Heavy Metal magazine. But just I prefer not to support platforms or organizations that engage in censorship. So there's that. There's some new OGGM material up on post-mort.com and probably other sellers of your choice. He's been keeping me very busy doing his work and not my own work. But I should have a few weeks free to concentrate on my own stuff. Obviously, Ronin has taken a bit of a back burner at the moment. Maybe once the primary writing on book 2 and 3 are complete, I might go back and do like a quick start or something just to get people interested. But part of the reason we're doing the Machinations of the Space Princess crowdfunder is to kind of test the waters, establish a presence, flag up any problems or whether it's the right thing to do before we go ahead with that one. It's tabletopless tonight, in theory, provided nobody is ill or nobody's power or internet is out, because there were some internet shenanigans last night. But otherwise, hopefully, it's tabletopless tonight. Fingers crossed. Not your legs. And then on Sunday, obviously, it's a Grimstream, and in theory, that is me running a Machinations of the Space Princess game. So, there we go. We've had some people drop out of what we've been playing on Sundays due to other commitments and life stuff. So we are looking for new players. I'm not going to say looking for a cast, because that's dumb. But we would like more people to be in our pool of players for our weekend games. So if that sounds like you, and you can stand having at least your voice streamed out to the internet via YouTube on a very small channel that doesn't get a lot of views, then hit us up. Alright, on to the video comments. I don't have a ton here, but I may go off on one or two of them. It's just a lot of the comments were very similar over this last week. Okay, on the video I did about the grooming gangs, one of Loki's says, people like Andrew Tate have been spreading misinformation to Americans about this, the grooming gangs. Americans and Canadians such as Jordan Peterson are naive enough to believe it. There is this lack of balance between what the rest of the world knows about America's politics and social situation and what Americans, less so Canadians, but some of them I guess, what Americans know about any politics in the rest of the world. I think maybe it's a little bit of a kind of legacy of empire here in the UK that we take such an interest in international affairs, and the UK punches above its weight diplomatically, or at least it used to. less so these days. But yeah, it's fascinating how many people's reaction to the deliberate and public dismantling of their democracy is to point at the UK and say, but my grooming gangs, though, even when you give them the facts. It's like two things are capable of being bad at the same time, and you're retransmitting ignorant misapprehensions about what has gone on in the UK. And I mean, this is why the current administration in the US is flooding the zone with shit, as Steve Bannon said. I may be slightly paraphrasing. It takes more effort to counter-argue something or to debunk something than it is to make the claim or to do the thing in the first place, which is why everything feels so sluggish, and any response to what's been going on feels so sluggish. And so it goes with a lot of other things, and often it's not necessarily worth the effort to debunk something that is so obviously and egregiously wrong, because they're not going to listen anyway, no matter what evidence etc. you might present to them. I mean, yeah, it's disheartening, but sometimes it still needs to be done, at least in some little way. You know, pick your fight here and there. On the video that I was right about Trump, because I was right about Trump. One of Loki's again says, the World Socialist website says that Trump is definitely a fascist. True, but they've probably been saying that for a longer amount of time than he's actually been a fascist. Whereas Norman Finkelstein says that true fascism only develops in the presence of a strong left, and the US doesn't have one. Right, this is something that is aggravating whenever anyone talks about the radical left in the US, when they don't really have a left wing, right? Even Bernie Sanders, probably the biggest left-wing figure in the US, he is centre-left by anyone else's standards. And left and right does still have some utility, as does authoritarian versus libertarian. Yeah, so like he's their biggest, most radical public left-wing figure, and he's not even particularly left-wing by anyone else's standards. However, the US public and right-wing and centre-right seem to hallucinate this strong left into existence, and they conflate the kind of social justice busybodies with the left. And there is a bit of crossover, but again, America doesn't really have a left, and a lot of these people aren't really left-wing, so it's complicated. So I think we have fascism as a reaction to a strong left that is almost entirely imaginary. So they do have it, it's just it's not there for anyone else doing any of the good things that we might associate with left-wing politics. Loki goes on. I think Trump has turned out to be a fascist because he is behaving fascistically. He wants to deport or imprison everybody who is non-white, who can be proven to be illegal, or ultimately who simply doesn't agree with him. He denounces communists a lot, when the fact is there are only a handful of actual communists in the USA. He equates communism with DEI and so on. Yeah, but like most of the American public, he's politically illiterate. Trump, I don't think, particularly has any politics. He is certainly a very petty and vengeful man on a personal basis, but he is surrounded by cronies and so on who know how to kiss his ass, and who have their own agendas, which are even more sinister than his petty, revenge-based policy-making. So, yeah, I guess we'll see. Polar Bleed says, most of the Americans who voted Trump did it because they were sick and tired of the authoritarian left. The same people who cancelled you for making game/RPGs that didn't fall in line with the message. Many of them are also former Democrats. Fighting the authoritarian left and shunning them from free societies is more important than Trump's supposed blunders and mishaps. Necessary evil. Well, they're not blunders and mishaps, are they? They are deliberately bypassing or deconstructing the US Constitution, which right-wing people are supposed to care about. They say that a great deal. His interference in organisations like USAID are leading to deaths and deprivation and starvation already around the world, and causing problems within America as well. You don't fix a problem by hitting it with a larger hammer, which is what this is, and the end goals of these people are worse. Also, you don't really have an authoritarian left, just as you don't really have a left. You're the busybodies who you are conflating with the left. They don't really wield any political power. The Democrats have been corporatized to a lesser degree, but in the same way, in a great deal as the Republicans have. And then the fascists have come in the wake of that in the Republicans. All this stuff that so upset you comes from social pressure, or pressure inside institutions that are more easily taken over, universities and so on. Whereas here we actually have an authoritarian state using the mechanisms of the state and sidestepping the state in some cases to prosecute a boldly and explicitly authoritarian and dangerous agenda onto people. So there's no comparison, and I don't see how anyone can even try to whataboutism this. It's ludicrous. I mean, we can certainly agree that the other side in America, the centre-right rather than the far-right, has its own problems, but they pale into insignificance compared to the problems with Trump and his cabal. Jude Duval says, interesting, I was taught that fascism is simply government and big business merging. Seeing how Trump is a wealthy businessman who's enriching himself, he has a lot of billionaires in his cabinet and key positions, 13 in fact, which includes Elon Musk. So fascism is often described as incorporating corporatism, and our tendency is to think that that means corporations. And in the modern world, it often does, because corporations take up the space that used to be held by, well, yeah, big business, but a bunch of other things as well, like certain trade unions and so on. What corporatism is blocks of special interests. So that could be businesses, it could be the nobility in older groups, it could be racial interests, it could be trade unions, even though they're more properly aligned with the left, but working class people can be fooled and turned against themselves. These are things that happen. In the modern world, and certainly in America, yeah, it's government and big business, but corporatism doesn't just mean big business. But, I mean, we have the fusion of big business and government, so by just about any definition, what's going on is fascist. The problem we're having, I think, is that people have so overused and misapplied the term fascist that it doesn't have the impact that it should, you know? I'm not particularly given to overblow things, but I think this is disastrous, and it absolutely is fascism, but nobody cares anymore. Venger says, this might be your worst take on anything you've ever remarked upon. Trump is doing a fantastic job. He's making America great again, while the UK is dwindling. How is it possible to be that ignorant and misguided? Lol. Well, you tell me, Venger. Because how is it a fantastic job to cause such a massive drop in the US stock market? How is it a fantastic job to weaken the FBI? How is it a fantastic job to abruptly cease funding on all kinds of projects all around the world that America is involved in, many of them feeding the hungry, providing vaccinations, providing basic medical care, projecting US soft power around the world and creating goodwill towards the US? How is any of that constructive? How is threatening to colonize Gaza constructive or good or fantastic? How is alienating your allies in Canada and Mexico and Europe, how is that a fantastic job? I mean, there is literally no upside to anything that has been going on, unless you're completely blinded. Here's an exercise. Imagine if Biden or Bernie Sanders were doing exactly what Trump's doing. Well, not exactly, but using the same end runs around the Constitution and flagrantly ignoring the law and so on to prosecute their agenda. I mean, Biden just tried to forgive debt, student debt, something which most legal scholars say he unambiguously had the power to do. And that was blocked on various obscure points of legal order and so on. And yet, here's Trump stealing the power of the purse from the broader American government and handing it to Doge, an unelected private entity. How would you feel if Bernie instituted a kind of Red Guard group of radicalized communist students and handed them the keys to the Treasury? Somehow I doubt you'd be thinking that was fantastic. And while I would think that the end results might be better for everyone, I would worry about that as well. So one of us is consistent, one of us isn't. Vermine Supremacy says, I don't know, it's just hilarious to watch from across the globe. Now, Vermine is, I believe, Russian. And it's interesting the parallels between the collapse of the Soviet Union and the way in which it was carved up by oligarchs and robber barons in the 90s, and now what's happening with the US. So is this the US version of the Russian collapse? Are we going to go back from a world with multiple superpowers to a much more balkanized, dangerous world, and one where the US is minimized, which might be the silver lining here to an extent? It'll be interesting and very bad for Americans if it does go the way that Russia did. Maybe this is just what happens to collapsing superpowers. We only have the one example, really. Kind of the British Empire as well, but that was very different and more rooted in older structures. On my video, Fixing the Left, another anonymous dipshit, that's their name, that's not me being mean, says any rational person today would reject both the left and the right, yet Jim still sides with the side that cancelled him. See, I don't regard them as left-wing, and whether they had been horrible to me or not doesn't change the fact that I am for universal healthcare, ending homelessness, universal basic income on a socialist basis, the rule of law, fairness, equality, equal opportunity, investment in education, localized democracy. All of these things are left-wing, so even if they've been mean to me, which again I would challenge the premise there, why would I turn my back on all of those things that I passionately believe in just because people on the right wing said attaboy over my disagreements on social justice? Put lots of inverted commas around that. But it doesn't make any sense, which is why I really do not trust people like Melanie Mack or Dave Rubin or whoever else. I think these kind of values are so fundamental that anyone who turns on a dime and claims to be the exact opposite all of a sudden is not being kosher. On the Solomon Kane review, goes by Steve, says, I wasn't sure how true it is that the player community isn't that into pulp. I wasn't sure what exactly you meant by pulp, though. As for other pulp systems, Pulp Cthulhu is pretty popular. I'd be interested in more elaboration on why you think pulp isn't popular and where that opinion came from. Not trying to contradict you or convince you otherwise, just interested. So when I talk about pulps, I mean more the adventure serials, like the proto superheroes, like the Shadow, or aviation stories, things like that. There's a whole bunch of clustered genres which were kind of expertly deconstructed and reconstructed in Warren Ellis's Planetary when it dwelt on that stuff. I mean, like Tarzan, John Carter of Mars, The Shadow, like I mentioned, and others. And these have never really grabbed onto people. We have a John Carter RPG, which is great and all, and very artistic and good in a lot of ways, but it didn't exactly set the entire world on fire, right? And we've seen in other genres of entertainment, comics and so on, you can kind of, or films, you can kind of scoot by on pulp revivals and things, but it never really seems to take off, and it's a shame. Like Pulp Cthulhu is leaning pretty heavily on the Cthulhu part. Just something pure pulp. I've seen a lot of people write a lot of pulp-oriented material, and then it's the juice ain't worth the squeeze commercially. On one of my game reports on Across 1,000 Dead Worlds, Gotcha Pine said, "The production of this after-action report is so good. Just found out about your channel, subscribed right away. Hope to see more of Across 1,000 Dead Worlds in the future. That game is just amazing if you're into space RPGs." Yeah, it is a good game. As for more after-action reports, they are quite intensive in terms of time and effort, and unfortunately, again, the juice ain't worth the squeeze. I'm glad you like it, but not enough people liked it for me to continue doing those, given the amount of effort it takes to do them, and how much other stuff I have going on and want to get done. And lastly, Kalergi makes a return. Marnie Stewart says, "Lol dude, you're not a European, look at you. Although, yeah, I'm sure your ancestors certainly did a lot of colonizing and still do. I am very, very white, very pale, in fact. My ancestry goes back at least as far as the Normans, and the Normans are French crossbred with Vikings. So, apocryphally, might have a little bit of gypsy blood, but that's all, and pretty dilute at that. It never ceases to amaze me how people project their racial anxieties onto me. I guess I have one of those transracial faces that can be interpreted as anything. I don't know. It's all very weird. Zang.
I don't often make explicitly political games, but The Little Grey Book is one of them. It's a parable about this social media panopticon we've all made, where everyone is always watching each other for anyone who steps out of line in any way. And The Little Grey Book is about the inescapability of upsetting someone. It's a one-trick pony, but it's a good one-trick pony. Available at DriveThruRPG and post-mort.com.